Gnosticism is the general banner under which all of this stuff can be placed. Gnostics believe, the central tenet of Gnosticism, and it's hard to put this across because modern Gnostics are such cheerful people, but they've forgotten their real roots. The central perception of Gnosticism, no matter how you slice it, is that we don't belong here, that we are strangers, that something terrible happened, and that accounts for why we're here, that we were destined for a much better deal, and something went terribly, terribly wrong. It takes different forms. Some Gnostic mythologies are fairly straightforward. Some are fairly Baroque. The one that I enjoy is one of the more Baroque ones. The 2nd century Gnostic bishop Valentinius had this notion that there were 36 archons. They are demons of progressively lessening power that interpose themselves between man and a true vision of God. And the last of the archons, the 36th archon, was Sophia, and the only of the archons that was female. There's a tremendous sexual ambivalence in Gnosticism, which we can talk about, which is resolved in different ways. But anyway, the 36th archon is Sophia. She looked upward toward the higher God and saw him bring forth creation, of which she was the final manifestation. And in her heart, an avarice grew, a wish to create in the same manner as the highest and hidden All-Father. And she brought forth, it's described as an abortion. She self-fertilized herself. She did not understand the requisites of creation, and she turned inward into herself, and she brought forth a monstrosity. And this monstrosity is the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, Jehovah. And when she saw what she had done, that she had brought forth this monstrosity, she flashed through a whole bunch of emotions very quickly. Horror, guilt, rage, fear, agony, like that. And these emotions of the errant Sophia condensed as the material world over which Ildabuath was then made Lord. So the entire material universe is seen as the condensed emotional debris of the horror of the 36th archon upon witnessing her own creation, who is then made God over this universe. Well, even though this is this really bad scene, it still nevertheless has this extremely tenuous connection to the highest and hidden All-Father in the form of what is called the scintilla, the spark, the soul spark of divinity. So then the goal of Gnostics, born into this unfortunate world, is to gather the light together, to save the light. The light is defiled by its presence in the world of material existence, and the light must be gathered. Well, so then the central soteriological concern, that means the central salvational concern of Gnosticism, is how shall we gather the light? And their whole theology then is, what is the light? How should we gather it? And once we have it, what do we do with it? And then there were various answers.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is Orion. What I want to talk about in this video is about pretty much the great power that can be manifested by the powers that be, the old gods, the ancient ones, of which I work with. And they work with me. So basically, I'll be talking about Gnosis. It's going to be called Gnosis, the Serpent, and Sophia. And at the end of this video, which is an audio video, I'm going to show you some pictures that is nothing more than a miracle. Okay, let me start. The word Gnosis represents not intellectual knowledge, but spiritual knowledge. One of my main guides that is often teaching and showing me many new things. Her name is Sophia, and in itself, Sophia's name means wisdom. Sophia has been represented by many other names over time. Some examples would be the Great Mother, Mother Earth, and many more. The universal energy, the power that we call God under many names throughout the world, is neither male or female, but can manifest separately as both male or female aspects. Everything we see around us in this physical world, including human beings, are a manifestation of both the male and the female, the two pillars, the left and the right, that when together make up what we call God. So therefore, all of what we see with our physical eyes is a reflection of God made manifest. The ancient serpent has been honoured, respected, and worshipped for thousands of years. In almost every culture and religion throughout the ages, you will find the acknowledgement of the ancient serpent, from secret books to spiritual artwork. Just to name a few cultures and religions where the ancient serpent holds an important place: the Kabbalah, alchemy, Egyptian manuscripts, teachings and images, hieroglyphics, the Mayans, the Aztecs, Hindu, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Aboriginal culture, and many, many more. In fact, most cultures and religions of the days gone by held the ancient serpent god in the highest honour. To the Aboriginal people, the ancient serpent was called the rainbow serpent, and was also considered to have great healing powers within its venom. In yoga, the Kundalini energy waiting to be awakened within us was called and is called the sleeping serpent of fire, or the goddess, meaning that Sophia and the serpent are one and the same. So to me, the ancient serpent is in fact the ancient serpent of wisdom, Sophia, and knowledge, Gnosis. That means it could be said this way: the ancient serpent of Sophia and Gnosis, enlightenment and illumination. This is how I see things, and therefore the ancient serpent of Sophia and Gnosis is worthy of honour and worship. The Christian equivalent to this is the inner flame that lights the way, called the Holy Spirit, which is the feminine aspect of their Trinity, in other words, Sophia. Yet the modern Christian movement has turned the symbolism of the serpent into something negative, and in some stages they've even labelled females as unclean and at a lower class than that of the male. In my teachings, both the male and the female are equal and perfectly balanced. An example of this would be the story of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, within the first book of the Bible called Genesis. However, the Christian Church will tell you that anything that is honoured, respected, worshipped, or religious teachings outside of what they have been told is evil, all of it, even if they have never taken the time to learn about or understand it. So as you can see, they are not a very reliable source to get true information from, and this can also be said for Christian demonology. The real serpent in the Garden of Eden is the serpent of Sophia and Gnosis, wisdom, knowledge, enlightenment, and illumination. The ancient serpent opened Adam and Eve's eyes so that they could see, and from that they received free will to decide for themselves. They were no longer slaves or like robots to the Hebrew God. They received a mind of their own. They received gnosis, knowledge. The ancient serpent is not our enemy, but in fact our helper, teacher, guide, and much, much more. The ancient serpent's power and energy is part of our connection with the ancient ones, the old true gods that we need to connect with once more so that we can have direct communication with them. They will show you and teach you many things. The things you will see them show you, you will see it with your own two eyes, and it will not be based just on blind faith. Once you feel the energy or the presence of the ancient ones around you, as I do, it will feel unlike anything you have ever felt before, so much so that I cannot really explain it fully, as you have to experience it for yourself.
If you know anything about ancient Christianity, you might have heard of Gnosticism. For Christians, Gnosticism is the arch heresy of all heresies. It is an esoteric, mystical cult in opposition to a more authentic Orthodox Christianity. Traditional Christian scholars such as N.T. Wright think it is a particularly troubling heresy. Rather than believing in a bodily resurrection of the dead, or a Jesus that actually lived and died and rose again as a human, Gnostics, they say, are disgusted by the material world and see Jesus more as a spiritual being. The Gnostic conception of the afterlife, therefore, is an incorporeal existence away from this dirty and corrupted planet. Outside of Christianity, Gnostics sometimes are painted as countercultural mavericks fighting against stodgy Orthodox doctrine. Gnostics even made front-page news back in 2006 when the newly discovered Gospel of Judas was first published in English. Like other so-called Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Judas pays special attention to secret knowledge. Unlike the Gospels where Judas Iscariot betrays Jesus, in the Gospel of Judas, Jesus and Judas share a secret conversation away from the other disciples. Only Judas knows the secret mission of Jesus, and all his other disciples, they're just deluded by a false god. But what really is Gnosticism when we cut through the hype from both sides of this discourse? And why has it played such a big deal in discussions of Christian orthodoxy and heresy to this day? Now, from the start, it is important to say that Gnosticism did not really exist. Well, by that I mean there wasn't a religion called Gnosticism in the same way that Christians and Jews called their religions Christianismos and Judaismos in antiquity. In other words, there was no church of Gnosticism. Of course, authors such as Plotinus and Irenaeus talk about people called Gnostics, or Gnostikoi for you Greek philologists out there. But Gnosticism as a term, as an ism, was invented by modern scholars to account for a family of writings, persons, and beliefs that all reflect a similar theme. So when we use the term Gnosticism, it is better to think of it as a school of thought, rather than a religion or a discrete, unified social group. So what did these Gnostikoi really think? Well, if you've watched any of my other videos, you won't be surprised to hear that it's complicated. You see, most of what we know about Gnostics comes from polemics. what we would call anti-Gnostic writings. It would sort of be like asking a Democrat to write an essay called "What is a Republican?" Rest assured, it would not be completely unbiased, with exaggerations and half-truths thrown in there throughout. So for example, a friendly neighborhood bishop by the name of Epiphanius of Salamis writes, "The Gnostics are a blasphemous assembly, full of enormous recklessness, and the filthy perversity of their beggarly obscenity truly pollutes the ears." Harsh words for sure, but he goes even further. According to Epiphanius, the Gnostics are a filthy and promiscuous bunch, holding orgies instead of church services, and eating babies instead of bread and wine for the Eucharist. And if you think eating babies can get even worse, it does. I'm just really interested in keeping this video blog PG-13. If you want the R-rated version, just go read Epiphanius. Okay, Epiphanius is an extreme example, but I hope it illustrates how difficult it is to reconstruct an ancient theology using writings written by guys that absolutely hated that theology. These accusations are obviously slander instead of historical portrait of the ancient Gnostics. I don't really think they were eating babies. A better way to find out about the ancient Gnostics is to read their own texts. We have a large collection of Gnostic texts called the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of Christian texts discovered in Egypt in the 1940s, making it one of the most important archaeological discoveries of all time, along with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Comparing the Nag Hammadi Library with the polemics of the Church Fathers, scholars have been able to reconstruct a stereotypical Gnostic theology, what I call a list of Gnostic cliches for reasons that I'll get into later. The first Gnostic cliche is that they believed in a dualistic anthropology. This means that they sharply delineated between the material body and the spiritual realm. They valued the soul as something transcendent and harmonious, trapped within a dirty, corrupted body. The ideal afterlife, therefore, is for the soul to escape from this body and enter the spiritual realm. Since this world is so messed up and corrupted, this means that it must have been created by a messed up and corrupted God. Therefore, the second Gnostic cliche is that they believed in a dualistic theology, one that states that there are two main gods, one higher, perfect God called the Monad, and a lower, inferior, almost evil God called the Demiurge, the one that created this material reality. The Nag Hammadi text called the Apocryphon of John is probably the best example of this dualistic theology. The Apocryphon of John reinterprets the creation myth that we find in the book of Genesis. Instead of God being the supreme being that creates Adam and Eve, he is a jealous and lesser God that traps humanity on a corrupted planet, hiding the keys to divine knowledge in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Jesus in this reinterpretation is a savior sent from the Monad to save humanity from the Demiurge. He encourages Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit to attain divine knowledge, and therefore eternal life. This leads into the final Gnostic cliche, a primacy for secret knowledge. This is what we talked about earlier with the Gospel of Judas, how only Judas had a special monopoly on the secret mission of Jesus that the rest of the disciples were ignorant about. The problem with defining Gnosticism as a typology, or as a list of characteristics, is that it emphasizes certain characteristics at the expense of others. So for example, how many Gnostic texts do you think match the typology that we just created? Dualistic anthropology, dualistic theology, and a primacy for secret knowledge. Let's take the Gospel of Thomas for an example, which is commonly understood as the most famous Gnostic gospel. We certainly see a concern for secret knowledge. The first line of the Gospel of Thomas reads, "These are the obscure sayings that the living Jesus uttered and which Thomas wrote down. And he said, 'Whoever finds the meaning of these sayings will not taste death.'" Eternal life itself depends on secret knowledge here. Other passages throughout the Gospel of Thomas talk about the individual embarking on a journey of inward truth. But does this concern alone warrant calling the Gospel of Thomas Gnostic? There is no wicked demiurge, there is no hatred of the material world. And if you start going through every text of the Nag Hammadi library, you'll find that none of them quite fit this typology that we've created. The Gospel of Truth, for example, written by the arch-Gnostic Valentinus himself, has no wicked demiurge, it has practical moral values, and Valentinus talks about an earthly Jesus that actually died and rose again from the dead. Terribly earthly things to do for a theology that supposedly hates material existence. And this is why I use the term Gnostic cliches. They are stereotypes that are certainly evident in ancient Gnostic texts, but we should be careful not to think of Gnosticism as a set of beliefs with boundaries as rigid as these cliches. Some scholars want to throw out the term Gnosticism entirely. thinking it's just too blunt of a tool to do such precise historical work. The jury is still out on these debates, but if you're not a scholar, it's good enough to recognize that the Gnostics believed a variety of theologies that fall within one of the stereotypes that we just talked about. Of course, Epiphanius and Irenaeus never use a term quite as polite as variety. Instead, for these church fathers, Gnosticism represented a heresy. But why so much vitriol? And why does this matter for today? Heresy was viewed as dangerous or invited exile precisely because it involved outsiders trying to become insiders, or insiders that other insiders were trying to push out. This infighting exemplifies a phenomenon called the narcissism of small differences, an unnecessarily complicated term that means when closely related communities, whether religious, ethnic, or political, engage in near constant warfare because their small differences are more threatening than some distant foe. So for example, although Gnostic theology sounds kind of weird to modern Christians, Gnostic and Orthodox Christians have a lot more in common than, say, Christians and ancient Celts. Both Gnostic and Orthodox Christians affirm the existence of Jesus. They both think Jesus had some major role to play in world history and salvation, but their differences spark anger and suspicion, while their differences with ancient Celtic religions doesn't exactly spark a thriving genre of anti-Druid polemics. The point of all this is to show that you can't talk about Gnosticism without talking about heresy. The two are almost synonymous, both in antiquity and in Christian churches today. But this position doesn't exactly help when we are trying to place Gnosticism into its historical context. We're essentially siding with the baby-eating perspective of Epiphanius when we do. We can't exactly take orthodoxy for granted when we study ancient Christian texts, a time when the delineation between orthodoxy and heresy was a lot more fluid, and there was a surprising diversity of theology within Christianity itself. This concept of the narcissism of small differences, the idea that we fight our religious neighbors a lot harder than we fight anyone else, that concept is alive and well today. It not only can help us see what ancient Gnostics really were like 1500 years ago, but it also might help us cut through religious conflict today, recognizing slander when it happens, and achieving a more nuanced perspective of the opposing party, even if they seem like terrible people to you. As always, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.
An archon in the Gnosticism of late antiquity was any of several servants of the Demiurge, the creator god that stood between the human race and a transcendent god that could only be reached through gnosis. In this context, they have the role of the angels and demons of the Old Testament. They give the name to the sect called Archotics. They were thus called from the Greek word rho chi omicron nu tau epsilon sigma, principalities or rulers, by reason that they held the world to have been created and ruled by malevolent archons. The term was taken from the ancient Greek position of office archon, hebdomad. A characteristic feature of the Gnostic concept of the universe is the role played in almost all Gnostic systems by the seven world-creating archons, known as the hebdomad. These seven are in most systems semi-hostile powers, and are reckoned as the last and lowest emanations of the Godhead. Below them, and frequently considered as derived from them, comes the world of the actually devilish powers. There are indeed certain exceptions. Basilides taught the existence of a great archon called Abraxas, who presided over 365 archons. The ancient astronomy taught that above the seven planetary spheres was an eighth, the sphere of the fixed stars. In the eighth sphere, these Gnostics taught, dwelt the mother to whom all these archons owed their origin, Sophia above below. In the language of these sects, the word hebdomad not only denotes the seven archons, but is also a name of place, denoting the heavenly regions over which the seven archons presided, while Adod denotes the super-celestial regions which lay above the control. The Ophites accepted the existence of these seven archons, Jaldabaoth, called also Saklas and Samael Satin. Feminine name, Pronoia Sambathas, we, prophets, Moses, Joshua, Amos, Habakkuk. From Hebrew Yaldabaoth, child of chaos, the outermost who created the six others, and therefore the chief ruler and demiurge par excellence. called the lion-faced Leontoides, Yao Jupiter, feminine name, lordship, prophets, Samuel, Nathan, Jonah, Micah, perhaps from Yahoo, Yahweh, but possibly also from the magic cry Yao in the mysteries. Sabrath, Mars, feminine name, deity, prophets, Elijah, Joel, Zechariah. The Old Testament phrase Yahweh Sabaoth or Jehovah of Armies was thought a proper name, hence Jupiter Sabis, Astaphanos or Astaphios Venus. Feminine name, Sophia, prophets, Esdras, Zephaniah. Astaphios is beyond doubt the planet Venus, as there are Gnostic gems with a female figure and the legend Astaphe, which name is also used in magic spells as the name of a goddess. Adonios the Son, feminine name, kingship, prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, for the Hebrew term for the Lord, used of God, Adonis of the Syrians representing the winter sun in the cosmic tragedy of Tammuz. In the Mandean system Adonios represents the sun, Elios, or Ilios, or sometimes Eileen Mercury. Feminine name, jealousy, prophets, Tobias, Haggai. From Elohim, God, Horios the moon, feminine name, wealth, prophets, Messiah, Nahum, from Jero, or Light, or Horus. In the Hellenized form of Gnosticism either all or some of these names are replaced by personified vices. Orthardia, or audacity, is the obvious description of Yaldabaoth, the presumptuous demiurge, who is lion-faced is the archon Orthardia. Of the archons Kakia, Zealous, Thonos, Uranes, Epithymia, the last obviously represents Venus. The number 7 is obtained by placing a pro-archon, a chief archon, at the head. That these names are only a disguise from the Sancta Hebdomas is clear, for Sophia, the mother of them, retains the name of a Dode Octonosho. Occasionally one meets with the Archon Isoldios, which is evidently the El Shaddai of the Bible, and he is described as the Archon number 4. In the system of the Gnostics mentioned by Epiphanius we find, as the 7 archons, Yao, Saklas, Seth, David, Eloian, Elanios, Yaldabaoth. The last book of the Pistis Sophia contains the myth of the capture of the rebellious archons, whose leaders here appear as 5 in number: Paraplex, Hecate, Ariauth, Typhon, Ictanabas, Mandeans. Among the Mandeans, we find a different and perhaps more primitive conception of the 7, according to which they, together with the mother Namrus and the father, belong entirely to the world of darkness. They and the family are looked upon as captives of the God of light, who pardons them, sets them on chariots of light, and appoints them as rulers of the world. Manichaeans. The Manichaeans readily adopted the Gnostic usage, and their archons are invariably evil beings. It is related how the helper of the primal man, the spirit of life, captured the evil archons, and fastened them to the firmament, or according to another account, flayed them, and formed the firmament from the skin, and this conception is closely related to the other, though in this tradition the number of the archons is lost. Origins. Planet Ionius tells us, the Holy Hebdomad is the 7 stars which they call planets. It is safe, therefore, to take the above 7 Gnostic names as designating the 7 planetary divinities, the Sun, Moon and 5 planets. In the Mandean system the 7 are introduced with the Babylonian names of the planets. The connection of the 7 with the planets is also clearly established by the expositions of Celsus and Origen, and similarly by the above-cited passage in the Pistis Sophia, where the archons, who are here mentioned as 5, are identified with the 5 planets. In this, as in several other systems, the traces of the planetary 7 have been obscured, but hardly in any have they become totally effaced. What tended most to obliterate the 7-fold distinction was the identification of the God of the Jews, the lawgiver, with Yaldabaoth and his designation as world creator, whereas formerly the 7 planets together ruled the world. This confusion, however, was suggested by the very fact that at least 5 of the 7 archons bore Old Testament names for God: El Shaddai, Adonai, Elohim, Jehovah, Sabaoth. Wilhelm Mans has also pointed out that Gnostic eschatology, consisting in the soul's struggle with hostile archons in its attempt to reach the pleroma, is a close parallel of the soul's ascent, in Babylonian astrology, through the realms of the 7 planets to Anu. The late Babylonian religion can definitely be indicated as the home of these ideas. Zoroastrianism. The Bundarishan is able to inform us that in the primeval strife of Satan against the light world, 7 hostile powers were captured and set as constellations in the heavens, where they are guarded by good star powers and prevented from doing harm. 5 of the evil powers of the planets, while here the sun and moon are of course not reckoned among the evil powers, for the obvious reason that in the Persian official religion they invariably appear as good divinities. It must be also noted that the Mithras mysteries, so closely connected with the Persian religion, are acquainted with this doctrine of the ascent of the soul through the planetary spheres. Usage. Judaism and Christianity. The N.T. several times mentions the prince of the devils, or of the world, or of the power of the air, but never uses the word absolutely in any cognate sense. In Leviticus Alpha Rho Chi Omega Nu represents, or rather translates, Malek. The true biblical source of the usage, however, is Daniel chapter 10 verses 13 to 21, where the Archon is the patron angel of a nation, Persia, Greece, or Israel, a name being given in the last case only. The Book of Enoch names 20 Archons of the 200 watcher angels who sinned with the daughters of men, as appears from one of the Greek fragments. The title is not indeed used absolutely, except perhaps once, where the Ethiopic has no corresponding words, but it has evidently almost become a true name, and may account for St. Jude's peculiar use of rogue iota. Christians soon followed the Jewish precedent. In the 2nd century the term appears in several writers alien to Gnosticism. The Epistle to Dionysius speaks of God sending to men a minister or angel or archon, etc. Justin understands the command in Psalms 24:7-9 to open the heavenly gates as addressed to the archons appointed by God in the heavens. The first spurious set of Ignatian epistles enumerates the heavenly beings and the glory of the angels and the archons visible and invisible, and again, the heavenly beings and the angelic collocations and the archotic constitutions, things both visible and invisible, the meaning being lost by the time of the interpolator, who in one case drops the word out, and in the other gives it a political sense. The Clementine homilies adopt and extend the N.T. usage, and further call the 2 good and evil powers, which control the destiny of each man, rulers, though more commonly, leaders. Greek theology. The mythology of ancient Greece knew gods, demons, and heroes. Theta epsilon omicron rho chi omicron nu tau epsilon sigma appear in the subsequent philosophy of Plato. However, Philo never alludes to archons. In a single passage, rho chi omicron nu tau epsilon sigma is merely correlative to pi eta kappa omicron iota. Presently the syncretism of the later Greek philosophy found room for archons, which appear in Neoplatonism and claim Plato's unwritten tradition. They are inserted by the author of the book De Mysteriis Egyptiarum, and even it would seem by his question Porphyry, below gods, demons, angels, and archangels, and above heroes and departed souls, in the scale of invisible beings whose presence may become manifest. It may be only an accidental coincidence that about the end of the 2nd century, Archon was one of the names given by the Platonist Harpocration to the second god of Numenus, for all the series of the ruling gods are collected into the intellectual fabrication as into a summit, and subsist about it, and as all the fountains are the progeny of the intelligible Father, and are filled from him with intelligible union, thus likewise, all the orders of the principles are rulers, who are suspended according to nature from the Demiurgus, and participate from thence of an intellectual life.
Adam was at the riverside when Eve woke. She walked through the garden to find him. Not fearful. Why should she be?
Eve. Eve, my child.
You are the serpent.
And you are the loveliest thing in a perfect garden. If only you knew it.
I do know it now. You have told me.
Will you pick some fruit for us?
Here.
Not peaches today.
What then?
Something rare and delicate. There, in the middle.
No, not that.
No. Doesn't it make your mouth water? And the scent of it?
We may pick of any of the fruits of the garden.
Well, of course.
Except those. Those we must not touch. The Lord God has forbidden us.
If God forbids this or that, Eden is no better than a prison.
No, we are free.
Well, if God has said you are free, then be free. Pick and eat.
But if we eat the fruit of that tree, we will die.
You will not die. Death is a big word. You don't understand it. But you could understand everything. Don't you want to be like that God you love so much?
Like God? Yes.
But you would rather be a slave. Does such a God need slaves?
He asks for obedience.
And would God have put the tree in the garden if it truly brought death?
I cannot argue with God.
Unless you taste the fruit.
Why do I feel the world pulling against me? The air is thick.
Perfection.
Cover yourself.
From you or from God?
What have we done?
What are we to do?